All right, terrestrial biomes. In terrestrial biomes, you're going to see a lot of stuff that's familiar. You're going to explain how we define a terrestrial biome, interpret some of these climate diagrams that now are going to take place over land, and then be able to identify, essentially memorize, the 9 terrestrial biomes. All right, so cactus and euphorbs, they're not closely related. But they have evolved these really similar adaptations that allow them to live in these hot, dry environments. They even look alike. Just by looking at them, you can see that they have physiologically a very a look. Like you would think that those were all cactus, but they're not. Evolutionary speaking, family speaking, they're not closely related. Scientists have long recognized that organisms possess this very distinct growth form and many adaptations that look very similar based on local temperatures and precipitation patterns. So if we were to examine plants that, just plants that live in the desert world, we would find many of these cacti-looking things. The plants that look like cactus in North American deserts are indeed members of the cactus family. But if you were in the Kalahari Desert, that would not be a cactus. That would be this euphorb, which is part of the Euphorbia family. These two distinctly different, distantly related groups of species look really similar because they've evolved this similar adaptations that allow them to live in a hot and dry environment. And the main thing being, of course, the ability to store large amounts of water and this waxy tissue coating that helps them reduce the water loss. So despite these common adaptations to desert conditions, these two plants have distinct flowers and spines, and only the euphorb family produces this real milky sap. And there's a difference to kind of help confirm why the two groups look similar, because genetically they're not closely related. Just over a long period of time, evolution favors these similar adaptations. And as a result, terrestrial regions are categorized by their biomes, by the vegetation that is there. So when we say biome, we're talking about a geographic region that's categorized by a particular combination of not only temperatures and precipitation, but also the vegetation. All right? And an aquatic biome, that's characterized more like salinity, depth, and water flow. But terrestrial systems definitely have a vegetation component. So average annual temperatures also contribute along with precipitation, and we can basically categorize this. Like the tundra and the boreal biomes generally exist where the average annual temperature is less than 5 degrees Celsius. I think it's 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And opposite of that, the temperature biomes exist in regions that experience annual temperatures between 5 and 20, are more the temperate climates, and then 20 plus, we're talking tropical. So in addition to that, the biomes can also be categorized by a combination of average temperature and precipitation conditions. And if we're looking at the planet, it's really, as you can see, it's really relative to latitude. What else do we know about latitude? Well, there are all kinds of currents and air and water cycling right there, and so might have something else to do with it. Climate diagrams will illustrate the patterns of annual temperature and precipitation. These are just helpful ways to visualize a general region of patterns of temperatures by graphing the average monthly temperature and precipitation. So these diagrams illustrate how the conditions in a biome vary depending upon a typical year. They also indicate when the temperature is warm enough for plants to grow. They're basically their growing season. In the two examples here, we can see that their growing season is very different. In the first one, that's January, February, March. So April through October is the growing season in that particular one, and then example 2, you see the growing season is is a little different. So in example 2, the precipitation line has fallen below the temperature line, so that it's going to be dry, right? And so that particular time period, May, June, July, August, and September, you will see limited plant growth. We can divide terrestrial biomes into 3 major categories: the temperate biomes, the tropical biomes, and then the tundra boreal forest biomes. Even though you've learned about more biomes than just 3, there's really 9 subcategories within those 3 categories. So we have the tundra and the boreal forest. And then all of the temperate regions, the temperate rainforest, the seasonal forests, the grasslands, the colder versions of the deserts, the woodland areas, everything that's more temperate. And then we have the tropical side, so the tropical rainforest. There's also a seasonal tropical rainforest in Savanna. The tundra is a cold and treeless biome. It has low vegetation. In winter, the soil is completely frozen. The tundra's growing season is very short. It's usually 4 months during the summer on a good year. Underlying the subsoil is what we call permafrost, and that is basically impermeable soil. It is a permanent frozen layer of soil. So you can see here from the tundra's climate diagram that much of the year is spent in very cold temperatures, and there's a very short growing season. The boreal forest is a biome that's made up primarily of conifers. So conifers are these evergreens, pine trees, you might say, and they can actually tolerate pretty cold winters, but they still have a short growing season. Most of North America is the boreal forest, and Europe, Russia, right around in there. The subarctic biome, which is very cold. The plant growth, though, however, is more constrained by temperature and precipitation, and the soil is pretty nutrient poor due to this slow decomposing of all of the vegetation. So the average temperature peak in this one is actually pretty short month there. But even though it has a larger growing season, and average precipitation is pretty constant, it's more driven by the actual temperature. So a temperate rainforest is a coastal biome, is how I like to call them, and they are usually moderately tempered. Coastal biomes are found along the west coast of North America, like Northern California to Alaska, Chile, out in New Zealand and all of Tasmania. Those are temperate rainforest areas. Ocean currents definitely affect who's considered a temperate rainforest. And nearly all 12 months of the year are growing seasons, even if it's foggy outside. And so you can see the temperate rainforest has a different climate diagram, more of a moderate annual temperature there, and high precipitation, right? So usually supports the growth of very large vegetation, very large organisms, and big trees. The temperate seasonal forest is a biome that's got warm summers and usually colder winters, so there's a temperature fluctuation. We can receive over 1 meter in precipitation annually. So this is where we live, eastern part of the United States, Japan, China, Europe. And so this is mostly dominated by deciduous trees that lose their leaves during the fall. Like hickories and maples and oaks, and all those sound really familiar to you because this is where you live. And so when I look at the temperate seasonal forest climate diagram, you can see that we do have a rise in average temperature because it has seasons. That would be the summer, right, June, July. And then, precipitation, because they get snow in the winter, or we get snow in the winter, and rain in the summer, it's pretty constant. The woodland shrub biome is characterized by these dry summers and mild rainy winters. It isn't like the coast of California, more of the southern African Mediterranean Sea area. It does still have 12 months worth of growing season, but the plant growth is really limited by the low precipitation. So if it's a relatively low precipitation year, they can have smaller growing seasons. And then this is where you hear about all the wildfires. So the shrubland biome is characterized by the dry climate. And if you look during the summertime there, we have low precipitation, high average temperature. The grasslands, or what I like to call the cold desert, is a biome that has really harsh winters and hot, dry summers, low average annual precipitation, and so we're looking at like the Great Plains of North America, South America, Central Asia, Eastern Europe. The plant growth is limited by the insufficient precipitation that happens during the summers, and then of course we have to worry about these very cold temperatures in winter. And when you're looking at the grasslands across the planet, you can see that they're very constant in latitude there, and they're really not very coastal at all. So those harsh winters and hot, dry summers really only support small vegetation, small organisms like grasses. So the tropical rainforest is a very warm and it's very wet, and you're looking at 20 degrees north, 20 degrees south of the equator, and there's very little seasonal temperature variation. So this biome has a lot of rain, right? A lot of precipitation. It's really warm, humid, wet, and so its precipitation climate diagram, it's all over the board, up high. So you can tell the difference between the forest, the seasonal forest, and the savanna, because these are more marked by temperatures and they have a very distinct wet, dry season. So the tropical seasonal forests are common in Central America and sub-Saharan Africa. And the soil in this biome is fairly fertile, and it can be farmed, and it has a lot of, everything degrades really quickly, but the low amount of precipitation in the dry season does constrain some of the plant growth, but essentially all of the nutrients, the actual bank of nutrients in the soil is there. So when we look at the seasonal forest and savanna, it's pretty average. Temperatures are pretty constant throughout the year, and then there is a very definite wet season. The subtropical desert is very defined. Hot temperatures, extremely dry conditions, very sparse vegetation. This is what all the pictures on National Geographic show a desert. You're looking at the Mojave Desert, things that should sound very, very familiar to you. The Great Victoria Desert that's of Australia, or the Sahara. So, this is where you're going to find those cactus and euphorbs that we talked about earlier, these really succulent plants that have special adaptations to hold on to water. And the subtropical desert, as you can see, its average precipitation is nada throughout most of the year, so they're lucky if it rains. And then that's pretty true about the temperature. So even though we have very constant temperature and precipitation, they peak very little. So thank you for watching Terrestrial Biomes.